On November 3rd, 2003, in rural Mark Township, Ohio, a 34-year-old father was shot inside his own bedroom. Deputies responded. A 10-year-old boy said it was an accident. The coroner agreed. The case was closed the same day. For nearly a decade, that classification didn't change. In this episode, we're going to examine that afternoon exactly as it was understood in 2003. Who was home, what was observed, what was documented, and why law enforcement accepted the explanation that was given. Before this became a reopened investigation, before there were any new statements, there was only one version of events. So that's where we're going to begin. Hey, Angela, how's it going tonight?
Hi, John. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm really good.
Good.
Glad to have had you come into the studio and just surprise you with a whole bunch of new shit to make your mind explode. So yeah, I always enjoy doing that.
You know, it's really difficult to get brain matter out of clothing, so you should probably keep my mind from exploding.
This is probably true. Or a cleaner approach.
Unless we could get like Tide to sponsor us, maybe.
Could do like a Dexter approach. Get line the walls in Visqueen or something like that.
There we go. I'm out the second I walk in and that's happened. Unless it's Halloween. No, I'll text you from afar and be like, what?
So I guess we should dive into it so that the listeners actually know what we're talking about, because
so I know.
Going to address it here in just a second.
Because you're the only one who knows.
Yeah, it lives quietly inside my head. Well, not so quietly, but inside my head. But welcome back, listeners, to Dark Dialogue, the podcast where we unravel the shadows of the human mind and dive deep into the mysteries that haunt small towns and big cities alike. I'm your host, John.
And I'm Angela. And together we shine a light on the stories that keep us up at night, unsolved disappearances, lives stolen too soon, and the questions that refuse to be buried.
So, before we go any further, you may have noticed that the opening of this episode sounded just a little bit different than normal.
It's a little bit different.
Well, that's intentional. Dark Dialogue is evolving. We're moving toward a more structured, evidence-first format, less scripted narration, more reconstruction, more primary sourcing, and deeper case architecture. So beginning in March, you'll see another shift. The research process behind these episodes is expanding significantly. More documents, more cross-referencing, more primary source material.
Okay.
So for our Patreon members and our Substack subscribers, that's going to mean an increased access to case files, research breakdowns, timelines, exclusive episodes, supporting documentation, all of that just won't fit into an audio version of the show, except of course for the episodes that are going to be strictly produced for our subscribers. And so if you value depth, transparency, and seeing how cases are built from the ground up, that's where the material will live. Now, before we begin this arc, we need to say something very clearly. This series that we're about to embark on will include discussions of child harm, suicidal ideation, all kinds of bad shit. This episode does not go into that territory in detail, but later episodes will. So if that is difficult for you, take care of yourself. I didn't want to let somebody start an episode. We're not going to be diving into, like child abuse and those kind of discussions in this particular episode.
Right.
But we're going to in this arc. And so the last thing that I wanted to do is have somebody that's sensitive to that start this episode and then be like, son of a bitch, I really wanted to know what happened,
but I can't
handle it.
Do it, yeah.
Yeah, so forewarning, it's going to happen in this arc. So if that's something you're sensitive to, maybe just skip this episode and this entire arc altogether. But this story begins as a tragedy. In 2003, a 10-year-old little boy called 911 and said that he had accidentally shot his father. Law enforcement believed him, the coroner ruled it as accidental, the community accepted it, and the case closed. So this arc is not about rewriting that day with hindsight, but it is about reconstructing how that day was understood at that time. Because sometimes the most important question isn't what happened, it's why everyone agreed about what happened. So we begin with the day everyone thought that they understood. So Angela, tell us where we are.
Okay, so before we move into the location, I do want to take just a moment to ask for your support. If you value the depth of research and the way the show is evolving, please consider subscribing wherever you're listening. Leave a review, and on YouTube, liking the episode and turn on the notifications. Those small actions genuinely help this show reach more listeners. And if you want access to the extended research materials, timelines, and primary source breakdowns John is building for this series, that's available through our Patreon and Substack communities. Now, as John said, let's talk about where this happened. So let's zoom out for a second, because when you hear Mark Center, Ohio, you might picture a town with a main street, maybe a courthouse square, maybe a few stoplights, but that's not what we're talking about. Mark Center is not an incorporated city. It's an unincorporated community inside Mark Township in Defiance County in the northwest corner of Ohio. Farm country between Hicksville and the city of Defiance. And when I say farm country, I mean flat roads stretching past fields, grain silos, long driveways, clusters of houses separated by acreage. Mark Township itself was established in 1851 and named for an early settler, Mark Kenton. Mark Center was laid out later in 1875 when the railroad line came through the area. Like many small Midwest communities, it grew up around that railroad depot. A few houses, a few businesses, a post office. That's really the footprint. Even today, Mark Center's zip code 43536 covers farmland, not subdivisions. If you're trying to picture the scale, the township population in recent years sits somewhere between 700 and 900 residents total. Not 7,000, not 9,000, a few hundred. In 2023 estimates, Mark Township was listed at around 726 people. That's fewer people than many suburban high schools. To put it in perspective, Defiance County as a whole, the entire county, had about 39,500 residents about the time of the shooting in 2003. That number hasn't changed much. It peaked in 1980 at just under 40,000 and has remained essentially flat, slightly declining ever since. This is not a rapid growing metro area. This is stable, slow growth rural Ohio. There's that word you love. The nearest larger hub is the city of Defiance, the county seat. That city has historical roots going back to 1794 when General Mad Anthony Wayne built
That's such a freaking cool name.
Mad Anthony?
Yeah, I like that.
When General Mad Anthony Wayne built Fort Defiance at the junction of the Maumee and the Auglaize rivers, we're going to go with it. Over time, it developed into a regional center for agricultural, timber, light manufacturing, and later industrial employment. But Mark Center itself, it's quieter than that. It functions more like a crossroads hamlet serving surrounding farms. Churches, a post office, scattered homes, fields, and if you drive through, you could pass it without realizing you've passed through anything at all, much like towns in Wyoming.
Very much so.
Robert grew up in Hicksville, another small northwest Ohio village. Hicksville's population hovers around 3,300 to 3,400 residents. It's a small agricultural and manufacturing mix. It's not a place known for celebrities or national headlines. The entire region, Hicksville, Mark Township, Defiance County, shares a similar character. Multi-generational families, industrial and agricultural work, slow demographic change, low-density living. Now let's talk about crime environment, because that's what matters when you're trying to understand how an event would be perceived locally. Defiance County, even today, runs significantly below state and national crime averages. In 2022, the overall crime rate in Defiance County was approximately 2,392 incidents per 100,000 residents. For comparison, Ohio's statewide average was over 4,200 per 1,000. The national average was about 3,900. Violent crime in Defiance County in 2022 sat around 124 offenses per 100,000 residents, well below state and national benchmarks. The city of Defiance, which is larger and therefore statistically more active, still supports crime rates through roughly 30 to 35% below national averages. And Hicksville, where Robert grew up, is frequently rated as low risk for violent crime. Mark Township itself isn't broken out separately in FBI reporting because the population is so small. But when you're talking about a township of roughly 700 to 900 people, serious violent incidents are rare. Which means this: a domestic gun death of a 34-year-old father in 2003 would not have been just another call. It would have been unusual, memorable, the kind of event that people talk about. In a place where generations stay put, events linger. And yet, in November of 2003, when deputies responded to that home, what they encountered did not look like an invasion. It did not look like an ambush. It did not look like a crime spree. It looked like something contained inside a single house. A tragedy inside a quiet township, flat roads, fields, a few hundred residents, and a gunshot that broke the silence.
And inside that house, a 10-year-old boy was on the phone with 911. So thank you, Angela.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I just got to say, I didn't live in this part of Ohio. I lived kind of on the other side of the state. It's just kind of sits in the middle, and I lived on the eastern side. But Ohio is a freaking beautiful state. It really is a beautiful state, especially in the fall of the year when all the leaves are turning and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a gorgeous state, and there's a lot of really small communities all across Ohio. Of course, going across the United States is kind of that way anyway. It's just more states have huge population centers than Wyoming. That's where they get all their damn population from. So, all right. So to kind of set the scene, you took us to this area of Ohio, and it's a tiny little town. Obviously, we talked about that. So the day is November 3rd of 2003, and it's early afternoon. So a 911 call is placed by a little boy, and you can find the call online and listen to it. It's friggin' heart-wrenching as can be. He is just, he's not crying. He is just overwhelmingly bawling his head off, begging for help. And he tells the dispatchers that the gun went off and he shot his dad. And the dispatcher is trying to tell him to do CPR and stuff like that. And the little boy's like trying to do it. And I wasn't able to find the entire 911 call, but I believe that it's Oxygen Network got the 911 call, and they played portions of it on one of the specials that they did on it. So, but like I said, he said he's alone in the house with his dad. And the gun went off. He's crying hysterically, and he keeps saying that he didn't know that the gun was loaded. He didn't know it had a bullet in it. That's what he kept saying. And you can hear him counting out the compressions as he's doing CPR or attempting to do CPR. We got to stop for a second, be a little bit honest. A 10-year-old doing CPR on a grown-ass adult is just about impossible.
Yeah.
There's been a couple instances that I've read about where kids were like jumping on a parent's chest and were able to get enough movement to actually accomplish something. But
because done right, shouldn't you break a rib?
You shouldn't. It's not a requirement, but
you didn't break a rib. You didn't do it right. That is not what I meant.
I've never done CPR on somebody I've never done CPR on somebody that I didn't break their ribs. Typically, you feel them break within the first couple of compressions. So yeah, it's very, very common.
You have to work that heart, and you got to get through all that junk to get to the heart. So
You do, and usually you're pretty hiked up, and usually you're going a little bit deeper than, I mean, it's not like, it's like 1 to 2 inches or something like that. I think I used to teach it, but it's been years ago, but it's like 1 to 2 inches of chest depth or something, but it's not like you're getting a ruler. You're wanting to make sure that you're pushing deep enough to be pumping that heart, so you're not worried about that. And it's very common that you feel ribs break as you're doing it. So
little kids on parents.
Well, you just don't have the strength.
Yeah.
You just don't have the strength. And even for a big guy like me, doing chest compressions on somebody for very long at all, you're freaking exhausted. I mean, it is not something that, every once in a while you hear these calls or you hear these people that they usually turn out to be the murderer, but they're like, I did chest compressions for 45 minutes. And it's like, no, you didn't. You do chest compressions for 10 minutes and you felt like you just ran up.
How are you breathing so well, sir? Yeah.
I mean, you can do it. I've done it. I've ridden in the back of the ambulance while we're transporting and maintain compressions the whole way to the hospital. But man, when you're done, you are done. But when they take off, you are done.
Yeah.
I was in the hospital with my dad not too long ago, and they brought somebody in, and they had one of those new machines that was doing the compressions for them. And I was like, son of a bitch, we needed one of those.
Yeah, those machines are pretty cool.
They're pretty cool.
Yeah.
But if you ever watch one of those machines operating, they're pretty violent.
They are very violent. I have seen it firsthand.
Yeah. So deputies arrive at this house, and there's no cars in the doorway. And there's no cars in the driveway.
I would hope there's no cars in the doorway.
There's no cars in the driveway. The front door's locked, but then this little boy named Corey opens the door, and he's extremely emotional. And the first thing he does is he tries to take the deputy by the hand back to the bedroom to show him where his dad's at. And the deputy's like, no, why don't you come out here? You sit on the porch. I'll go check it out, Deputy... First of all, the last thing a deputy wants is a 10-year-old to go back in where his dad is dead on the bed. So, he sets the little boy out on the porch, and he goes ahead and goes back and goes into the bedroom to check on the dad. And he sees the dad, whose name's Robert. He's laying in a twin bed. He has earplugs in his ear, in both ears. Sorry, earplugs in his ears, and blood is pooling around his head. On the bed, there's pamphlets of about like guns and hunting and that kind of stuff. A .22 rifle was laying on the floor, and it was obviously a close range shot. There is stippling present around the wound. So, for the listeners, if you don't know what that is, it's just basically when the gunpowder comes out of the gun with the bullet, it's hot, and it causes a burn pattern in the skin, which is called stippling, or, burns, essentially, is what it is. It's the gunpowder burns. There's absolutely no signs of any kind of forced entry. There's no visible signs of a struggle. And it was noted that no immediate life-saving attempts, it didn't look like any attempts had been made at CPR. And then when the EMTs arrived, they observed no signs of life. And it's interesting, I saw that noted throughout, and I find it interesting for a couple reasons. The first reason is the way that the case is going to be handled after all this. It's interesting if they noted that at the beginning.
Okay.
Then I also find it interesting because what the hell do you expect to see? And I'm not really downing the cops or the EMTs at all, because I think everybody did a job that I can't fault anybody. Let me say that. But what the hell do you expect to see with a 10-year-old? You expect him to have drug his, 200-pound father off the bed, throwing him onto the floor, done CPR. I mean, the man is
wrestling moves.
The man is, if Corey told the truth and he attempted CPR, then the best he was going to do is attempt CPR exactly however his dad was laying.
Yeah.
He's not going to be able to roll him over. I mean, I'm a fairly decent sized guy, and if I went down, there is a lot of adult women that wouldn't be able to roll me onto my back. It would be extremely difficult. You know, I'm 250 pounds, give or take. If a 90-pound, 100-pound girl tries to roll over a 200-pound man, it takes some work to get them like off the bed and on the floor. It just isn't going to happen.
Right.
You know, and so I just found it really interesting that was noted, because I wouldn't have expected to see much signs of life-saving stuff
with a child,
with a small child. We're talking 10 years old.
Yeah.
13, 14, 15, totally different story. We're talking a 10-year-old, you know, and he was a little dude. I mean, he's a little skinny 10-year-old, you know. He's not like one of these great big 10-year-olds that can pass like a freshman. No, he's all 10-year-old little boy. He's little bitty arms. He's a little guy.
Okay.
But Corey just kept repeating, it just feels like it's my fault. It feels like it's my fault. His mom's not home. It's just him and his dad there. And so, you know, the EMTs, they take him to the ambulance to check him out and stuff like that. Everybody's super sweet to him. There's a female EMT there. We'll be hearing from her kind of as we move through this arc. But, you know, she gives him a hug, and she's trying to, you know, kind of be motherly and supportive and caring, and just kind of help a little bit throughout all of this kind of stuff. But that's essentially where we're at as we start this story. So a very tragic accident at this house, and then we need to move on, and we got to talk about who it is exactly that's dead in the bed in there.
Okay. So,
like I said, in the bed is Corey's dad, a guy by the name of Robert Breininger, Robert Breininger. And I'm probably going to mispronounce that name, so you'll have to help me remember. It's Breininger.
Like I'm not going to mispronounce it?
It's a tough one. So it's Breininger. It's Breininger. So Robert Breininger was born January 11th, 1969. So in 2003, that made him 203 years old.
203 years old?
Yeah. So in 2003, that would have made him 34 years old. And, you know, like you talked about in the location information, he was raised in Hicksville, Ohio. So he's essentially a local kid, right? He grew up there in Northwest Ohio. You talked about how rural it was. It's close to Indiana, very close to Indiana, actually. And obviously he stayed rooted there regionally. And you know, that's like Hicksville, Defiance County, Mark Center, all kind of the same place, you know, and that's very common. It really doesn't matter where in the United States you go. It's very common.
There's always
these
like
small towns that are kind of clustered together that almost form like a complex. Here in our part of Wyoming, it would be like the Bighorn Basin, several small towns that all kind of almost function together in many respects, you know, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. And I couldn't find anything in the research that showed that he'd ever really left. He pretty much grew up there and stayed there. So I wasn't able to find a hell of a lot about his early life other than he grew up in that rural farming community there.
Okay.
The obituary described him as having come from and having created a loving home in his adult life. Couldn't find any criminal history on the guy. No like civil instability, no bankruptcies, no public scandals, no bad shit really at all. Okay. Nothing. He really strikes me as, and when I lived in Ohio, I knew a million of these people. They're just hardworking.
Regular blue collar guy.
We're gonna find out here in just a second that he worked at a steel mill like so many people in that Ohio Valley region. Not as many now, unfortunately, because so many of the steel mills closed, but it still is a major employer throughout that Ohio Valley region. There's a lot of steel mills there, and they're good paying jobs for blue collar workers that don't mind working their asses off. And these guys work their ass off. And so Robert worked for a company called Steel Dynamics. They're still in business. They're still doing what they do. And he worked in an industrial steel mill, and it provided stable and very good income. These guys make good money.
Well, it's dangerous, isn't it?
It's dangerous. It's hard work. It's shift work, which we'll be talking about. So, it's a factory job. Essentially, it's a good paying factory job. And so it's interesting if you look at like the Appalachian culture, when a lot of the people from the more southern states drifted up into this Ohio Valley region, this is what drew them, is a lot of jobs like this, and steel mills were definitely on that list that would draw the people up to there. So, but night shifts in that line of work are very, very common. And Robert worked night shift. He worked long hours, but it offered continuous, reliable employment and, like I said, a damn good paycheck. So in his early adulthood, he married a woman by the name of Wendy Bell, and him and Wendy had a son whom they named Corey, and they divorced when Corey was young. And then I found
younger, because he's still young.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, pretty young. I think he was around 4 when they got divorced. But I found it very interesting in researching this case that outside the name, I couldn't find shit about Wendy Bell.
Really?
No, not even existence.
It doesn't exist. Yeah, okay.
So it was very interesting because it's just not something that you hear or you come across a lot. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's not something that you come across a lot of the time, in that Corey's mother is largely absent from his life.
That's the mom that they're waiting on when they're outside. No, okay.
Nope.
So this is his real biological mom.
His real biological mom.
Okay.
And the death of Robert occurs several years post-divorce, about 6 years, the best that I could tell, post-divorce. So after the divorce, she's gone. She's a ghost, at least in the public record. But, even like watching interviews and stuff like that, I don't think that she was present in Corey's life after the divorce, which, again, is not unheard of, but it is rare for a mother. Yeah. You hear it with deadbeat dads all the time, unfortunately, but with mothers, it's not that common. So Robert, it becomes the primary parent, the full-time custodian of this little boy. And I couldn't find any kind of custody litigation at all that was documented. I don't think that there was a big, long custody dispute.
She didn't fight. She just bailed.
I think that's pretty much what happened. That's when there's an absence of information, it's easy to fill it by assuming.
Inference.
I don't know what the hell happened. All I know is she doesn't seem to have been present in Corey's life after the divorce.
Okay.
But probably because of that, he spent a lot of time with his paternal grandmother, and he went to kindergarten for a year in Indiana while living with his maternal grandparents.
So they didn't bail.
No, which was another component of this that I found
very confused.
Interesting is it seems like Wendy's parents stayed very involved, as he lived with them for a year, and he would go visit both paternal and maternal grandparents.
Well, I'm glad for that.
Oh, absolutely. But it was just interesting.
It's very odd.
But from everything that I was able to find, I think this is the important part. From everything that I was able to find, there was like no state intervention in the family dynamics at all. There was no CPS involvement that I could find. There was absolutely no indication that Corey's childhood at this period of time was anything but happy. I think it was probably a situation where Robert was working, and he was working shifts, and having been a single dad, it's no different for a single mom. Having been a single parent, it's very difficult. And when your job requires you to be gone at night, of course, I didn't have that, but it's got to be extraordinarily difficult. And so it wasn't surprising that grandparents maybe stepped in and said, okay, so until you kind of get on your feet, you get stuff figured out and all that kind of stuff, why don't you let Corey come and live with us for a while, you know?
It's very cool that it sounds as calm as it was. Just sweet and calm and seamless.
Yeah.
Without fighting for Corey.
Yep. And I think by all indications, this period of time was exactly like you described it. It was calm and it was healthy.
Okay.
For Corey. So it was just simply him and his dad, obviously with the grandparents involved. They had them, and they didn't live too far away. So it was probably a huge helping hand for Robert, and it was probably a comfort for Corey too, that he could go spend some time with grandma and grandpa, get kind of that motherly nurturing that, you know, a steel mill working father is probably not the best at.
Learn anything about that side of the family that he wouldn't have already have gotten to know.
Yep. You know, everything was very intact in the family during this period of time, right? So we've got a 35-year or a 34-year-old father. Well, at this time he was in his late 20s. Robert would have been in his late 20s because when Corey was 10 is when he died. And so this would have been about 6 years earlier. So this would have put him roughly about 28 years old, working at the steel mill. He's raising his son on his own. And everything seems to be, like I said, healthy and happy and going well during this period of time. Now, I couldn't find exactly when this happened, but at some point he meets this woman by the name of Judith Hockey. And the reason that I don't think I can say exactly when it was is it's not recorded anywhere. And the first time that Corey met her was when his dad took him to her for her to like babysit him while his dad went to work. And I believe that, at least it appears, that Robert and Judith had some sort of a relationship happening before this point.
Okay.
So I'm kind of guessing is what happened. This is pre-internet or early internet. This is not we're going to build a relationship over a dating app and then we're going to meet. This was very much the old traditional, the way that us older generation grew up forming relationships. And so I think it's probably very likely that they met. He didn't want to introduce her to Corey until he was sure, quote unquote, sure. And so who knows? They may have been dating for quite a period of time before that formal introduction. And then after that, they dated for several years. They didn't rush to get married. The timeline for this, the best that I could put together, the timeline for this would have been meeting somewhere around the mid to later 90s. And then Judith and Robert are going to end up getting married on November 22nd, 1998. So that gives us a rough idea that they dated probably anywhere between, I don't know, like 3 to 4 years or 2 to 4 years or somewhere in that kind of a neighborhood. The point is that Judith enters his childhood, and again, it gets really confusing with all the dates and everything. I think I actually screwed up because I think his mom and dad got divorced when he was younger, because I had 4 stuck in my head, but I believe that 4 is how old he was when they got married. When Judith and Robert got married. So if that's true, so that would mean that Corey was much younger when they got divorced. But none of this really matters. It doesn't factor into the story at all. What matters is that he was pretty little when they got married. Could have been 4, could have been 7. Somewhere in that neighborhood is when Robert and Judith tied the knot. And Judith had 2 children of her own. She had a son and a daughter, Emily and Garrett. And there was I couldn't find any sort of a criminal history or anything on her either. And she was also local to the region. She didn't move in there from somewhere else. And so the two of them, Robert and Judith, formed this blended household. They brought, 3 children under one roof. Obviously, there was the 2 adults. They're living in rural Ohio, and, they're restructuring their household, and that can be difficult,
Yeah.
It's easier with older kids. I never had to do it with little kids, but I can imagine it can be very difficult especially with younger kids. I don't know, maybe it's more difficult with older kids. I can't imagine it's ever easy to blend a household.
Yeah, probably not.
They're going to have different sets of rules. You're going to have different traditions. Oh, we celebrate Christmas this way. We celebrate it that way.
Yeah.
All of that comes into play. So nothing's going to be easy, but we do know that after they were married, Robert purchased a home in Mark Center, and then they moved in together into that house. It would have been a relatively short commuting distance to the mill where he worked. It was a good central location for the family and to maintain, that area that they all seem to be kind of tied to, the best that I could tell.
Okay.
So Robert's working at the mill, and then Judith then comes in and becomes the primary day-to-day caregiver. She's basically a stay-at-home mom, and she's going to be taking care of the kids through the day. And because of the fact that Robert is working nights, she's going to really, for all intents and purposes, become the primary parent, because Corey isn't going to see his dad very much at all. And I don't know how much he did before the marriage. I wasn't able to tell. I was able to find that Robert seemed like he was a really good dad. I mean, there was pictures of him and Corey out fishing and stuff like that. So I think on days off, he really tried to get Corey out and do stuff with him and engage.
Tried to bond.
Yes. But as far as day to day, I'm not entirely sure how much they were able to spend together day to day before Judith came into the picture, but it was made very clear that after the marriage, Corey didn't see his dad much at all. And now that Judith's in the picture, they're not having their father-son, let's get out and go fishing time. Yeah. It's more Robert and Judith time. And so, definitely a difficult dynamic to try to navigate there, right?
I know it might not matter, but do we know the age difference between her children and Corey?
I do. I have it noted in here, so we'll definitely be talking about it.
Okay.
Emily is very close in age to Corey, and I believe that Garrett is a little bit younger.
Okay.
I'm almost positive. So we're talking about 3 little kids.
Right.
For sure.
Okay.
We're not talking any teenagers here. We're talking little kids.
Little kids. Okay.
Yeah. But, Judith, because Robert's obviously he's working all night. And then if you've ever worked nights or somebody that worked nights, the daytime is pretty much sleeping.
Yeah.
And when you have school-age children, then you rarely see them because you're getting up, they're in school.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be able to run into them, maybe just depending on the shift that you're working.
Yeah.
You may or may not run into them, kind of pass each other as, they're coming home.
Yeah.
But as the story plays out and we've talked about the fact that Robert had his earplugs in. Well, those earplugs are because he puts them in so he can sleep through the day. So I'm pretty sure that his particular shift would have put him sleeping when the kids came home from school and then getting up to go to work after they've already gone to bed at night. Because again, we're talking about young kids, 10 years old and younger.
Yeah.
So they're probably going to bed pretty early. So, it's not like they're staying up until 11 or 12 o'clock at night.
At least back then.
Right.
Yeah.
Who knows now? But yeah. So, but even through this period of time, there's absolutely no documented police intervention at the home, nothing. Everything seems normal and happy and nothing that really, calls anything into question. So by the early 2000s, they've been married, give or take 5 years, 3 children. They have a structured household. It's a functioning family unit. Robert is working at the mill and Judith is stay-at-home mom. She's taking care of 3 kids. That's kind of how things are. this brings us to roughly 2001 when Judith, and she's been talking about this for a while. This isn't like in 2001 she just springs this. She's been saying this for a while now, and that is that she really wants to adopt Corey. By 2001, the household is obviously intact. It has been for the last several years. Things seem to be working well. And so the adoption is then finalized in 2001. So she legally becomes Corey's mom in 2001.
Okay.
And so, what that means legally, one thing that it means is it terminates any prior parental rights, which is another indication, which I didn't want to foreshadow too much when we were talking about this before, but that's another huge indication that something's up with Wendy.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't adopt somebody else's kid unless another parent agrees to it or is like legally indisposed or deceased. You know what I'm saying? It's not like you don't just marry somebody and then say, I'm going to adopt your kid. And it's like the ex has nothing to say about it. Like if the ex is not on board with that, or is it incarcerated and basically deemed to be an unfit parent?
Mm-hmm.
That shit doesn't happen. So there was something up with Wendy. I don't know what it was. It doesn't matter for the story, but I found it interesting because...
And Wendy's parents didn't contest it, so...
No. So yeah,
Okay.
I don't know. I couldn't find anything. I don't want to assume.
Do we know if Wendy's parents were still involved at this time? Or did Judith kind of...
We'll get to
fill that. Okay.
So, but, I don't want to throw stones or anything like that. Is all I can say is I think there's at least a good possibility that the divorce was a good move for Robert and Corey.
Okay.
Because it doesn't seem like Wendy was maybe all that interested in being a wife and a mother. I don't know, but so anyway, what it means is, it terminates any prior parental rights. So Wendy has no parental rights at all for Corey at this point.
Okay.
It also establishes, obviously, Judith is now Corey's legal mom.
Right.
And it gives her kind of that permanent custody structure that any other mom would have. An adopted mom is a mom.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, adopted parent isn't the parent. That's just how it works. It also, changes any kind of inheritance or next of kin kind of structure because she becomes his legal guardian.
Right.
And in order to facilitate this adoption, there had to be, like social worker evaluations and stuff like that. They had to come to the house. They had to talk to her. They had to talk to Corey. I imagine they talked to Emily and Garrett, and just... they inspected the home. They wanted to make sure that it was a clean home. They wanted to make sure that the kids had beds. And Corey appeared happy and healthy and answered all their questions in the appropriate ways and everything. They also interviewed school personnel, teachers and stuff like that. And I was able to find that they had talked to at least one neighbor of them. And everybody kind of seemed to say the same thing. There was really no red flags in the adoption record whatsoever. There was no documented objections to answer your previous question about her parents. There was no contested hearing. Nobody spoke up and said this shouldn't happen. There was no abuse findings at that time. And so the court approved it. In the house, it meant that Judith now had the primary legal authority in the day-to-day matters. It didn't really fundamentally change much,
right?
Because she'd been acting in that role for years already. But now, for logistics, I'm sure that it made things a lot easier because now she could legally make medical decisions. She could legally make the school decisions. She could, we'll talk about the discipline authority, but it does make it a little bit more clear cut, I suppose, when it's your legal child as opposed to stepchild. I don't know. We've got a lot to unpack in this case. This is just kind of introducing it to everybody, so we'll get there. But as a family in this situation where the biological father, is pretty much gone all the time. He's working nights, he's sleeping all day. Logistically, it makes a lot of sense. And if Wendy's out of the picture, which apparently she is, there's not a big reason not to do this.
I don't even feel like she was in the picture.
I know. It almost is like, she like gave birth and bailed. I don't know, man. It's not in the record. I couldn't find anything about it. It was just very interesting. But the important takeaways about the adoption is it's no longer any sort of a temporary blended family. Like, this is legally binding. We've been legally consolidated, not only with a legal marriage, but now with a legal adoption. So I found it interesting. I couldn't find any discussion about it. I've watched, a couple other documentaries on this case, and I've read pretty extensively in the case record. I couldn't find anybody that said, isn't it odd that Robert didn't adopt Emily and Garrett? But maybe their dad was in the picture. I didn't find anything about him either.
Okay.
It's just something that kind of stuck out to me.
Yeah.
Right?
Now that you bring it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not for, there very well may have been discussion about this. It very well may have been that their dad was involved. I couldn't find anything about it. It's just one of those things that make you go, And that was one of those things for me. So from the outside looking in, the public perception of the Breininger household would have been very much a happily married couple with 3 children. They're living in this rural Ohio home. The father works at the mill. The mother's managing the household. And definitely from the legal side of things, there's absolutely nothing that raises red flags. No investigations, no cops being called here, no domestic violence, no nothing. And the post-adoption years passed without any state intervention. There's no, calls to them saying that anything's going on. The household remains intact. And it will be noted that a couple of his elementary school teachers noted that it was really strange how Corey always wore long sleeves and pants, no matter what the weather was. It could be 90 degrees out, and he is in at least 1, if not 2 shirts, always long sleeves, sometimes turtlenecks in the summertime.
That's a flag. Yeah.
And they noted that he would have bruises on him. I can't say on a regular basis, but I can say that it was noted that at least a couple teachers noted bruises on him at more than one occasion.
Too frequently?
We'll get there. But then there was another teacher that would say that she questioned him pretty hard about what appeared to be a pretty bad bruise to his face, and he said that he fell out of a tree, and she accepted that explanation. And honestly, as a teacher, I would too. Like,
because kids fall out of trees.
Freaking 10-year-old little boy, they fall out of trees all the time. So, and again, there has been no CPS referral or anything like that documented coming from these teachers or anything. They just kind of took it as it's a little bit odd, but we don't see anything alarming here. He seems to have maintained routine pediatric visits. He went to the doctor. He maintained normal growth charts. There's no documented fractures or anything like that required any kind of medical intervention. Talking to the neighbors, some described Judith as being very enthusiastic about the adoption, but others described her as having very strict rules. I found it comical, and we'll be talking about this a little bit later as we move through this, but I found it both comical and maybe a little bit telling that the one neighbor was like, I don't like that lady. She uses foul language.
Oh, no.
But there was neighbors definitely that said that they felt that Corey had way too many chores and that he wasn't allowed to be a little boy. But there was never any formal complaints filed. And there, again, was no documented police calls for abuse or for anything to the house for that matter. In the records, I was able to find descriptions of like recreational items like four-wheelers, mini bikes, that kind of stuff. So it seemed like, they were a family that was willing to, pay for entertainment, so to say.
Go out and play and whatnot.
And then it was also noted that they went on, some pretty cool outings. Chuck E. Cheese, which especially during that period of time was huge for kids. But SeaWorld, Cedar Point. I don't know if you're familiar with Cedar Point, but that's a freaking big one in Ohio.
I actually have a friend who goes and works there all the time. I
want to say it had or it has like the tallest roller coaster in the world, or I think it's the tallest roller coaster in the world anyway. But yeah, it's a pretty freaking cool amusement park for those of you that like amusement parks. They went to fairs, they went to water parks. So, there was a lot of evidence, especially photographic evidence, showing a happy family, everybody smiling and everything. So at least from the outside looking in, everything seemed to be happy and structured and to be functioning as a healthy household. So then we get to a period of time before November of 2003, and it's nearly impossible to nail down an exact time frame on this because we're relying on a 10-year-old's memory.
Yeah.
But it would have been a short period before November. So we're talking maybe September, October of 2003. Judith sets Corey down at the table and she explains to him that his dad has a brain tumor and that he is dying.
Didn't see that coming.
Yeah. And we're going to know that later. There's absolutely no medical record that will confirm this tumor diagnosis. There's no documentation of any kind of treatment or anything like that. So there's nothing that can be found about this tumor, but we do know that Corey says that she sat him down and had this very blunt conversation with him that his dad is dying. His dad has a brain tumor and he's dying. And so this puts him obviously at 10 years old. And a 10-year-old now is completely reliant upon their parents for all medical information. But a 10-year-old in 2003 is 100%. This is pre-Google. It's not pre-internet, but I'm pretty sure it's pre-Google. And it is not a period of time where a 10-year-old is probably going to have access to internet searching anyway. This is the time period where he is 100% relying on his parents for this kind of information. Mm-hmm. And Robert's working night. He's sleeping through the day. So that means that Judith is the primary authority. Yeah. Exactly. And so anything like this is going to be flowing through her. And so a child believing, you just got to put yourself in his shoes. A child believing that a parent is seriously ill, going to be dying, is tough. Mm-hmm. A child believing that his only biological parent, and, don't get me wrong, that adoptive parents aren't real parents, that's not what I'm saying, but what I am saying is when you go through a period of time where it's just you and your dad, mm-hmm. and then this other person comes in, whether you like them, whether you love them or not, is irrelevant. They're not a replacement. No, they're not a replacement for your dad who's been there with you since birth. It's, maybe by the time they graduate high school, they've formed a kind of a bond like that. Maybe by the time they're in college, they've formed a bond like that. When they're little, no. And when they're a little boy and we're talking about losing their dad, and of course, I'm talking in generalities. This isn't a rule, but, little boys idolize their dad. Mm-hmm. Little girls idolize their mom. I mean, that kind of happens naturally and normally. Yeah. And so is all I'm trying to say is when we're talking about the psychology of a little kid losing their parent, it's extraordinarily rough. When we're talking about one that's losing their dad that's been with them the whole time, it kicks a little bit harder, right? There's no record that Corey ever challenged the claim. There's no record that Corey ever talked to his dad. Corey will later say that Judith said it was very important that he not talk to his dad about this, that his dad was very specific, that he did not want Corey to know about it.
But she thought he should, so she's trying to gain trust.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. It just becomes part of his understanding of his home life and what's kind of transpiring in his life right now. So just kind of to sum up everything where we're at right now, as we kind of come to a close of this episode, is we've got Robert, who is employed at Still Dynamics. He's working nights. He's sleeping through the day. He is apparently got a brain tumor. He owns a house in Mark Center, and they seem to be in good financial standing. I was not able to find any sort of record of missed payments or, imminent foreclosure or anything that would indicate that there was any sort of financial problems going on. They have vehicles that are well maintained. They have the recreational vehicles that I talked about with four-wheelers and mini bikes and all that kind of stuff. And I don't just throw this stuff out there. It's all going to become important as we kind of move through this arc. And then they're going to places like Cedar Point and to SeaWorld and to Chuck E. Cheese. And so we're not talking about indigent people here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it is just important just to note during this episode, I think that Robert does have a life insurance policy that's been provided through his employer. And, there's nothing odd about that as a father, that he has a life insurance plan. It's pretty routine planning as an adult, especially as a parent. And so there's no controversies that come of that at all, especially where we're at in the story in 2003. I just think that it's important for us to understand that does exist as we kind of move through this arc. And so really where we're at is coming full circle back to November the 3rd, 2003, in that day that Robert was shot. And so looking at the early afternoon, Robert came home. I couldn't find exactly what time he come home, but I do know that by around 3 o'clock, Robert has put his headphones or his earplugs in, and he's crawled into bed and he's fallen asleep. He's sleeping in a twin bed. Another thing that I found interesting, but I wasn't able to find any specifics on, it's very possible, and again, I'm just spitballing here because I wasn't able to find any reason for this, but it's very possible that he had kind of a quote unquote sleeping room where he could go in, close the doors, black out all the windows and everything, and he could sleep on his work days. And then him and Judith shared a marital bed on normal nights. And I don't know that I've ever seen that necessarily before, but it makes logical sense.
It does.
And that way Judith could kind of come and go as she needed to throughout the day without disturbing him. And then school gets over, the kids they come home on the bus. Judith is there to meet them, to meet all three children when they come off the bus. And then after she gets them in the house, Judith, Emily, and Garrett leave Corey alone in the house with his dad sleeping. And then we know that Robert is shot. And he's shot with a .22 caliber rifle. If you research this case, you're going to find a lot of stuff that say he was shot with a shotgun. I went down that rabbit hole. I don't know why that's out there. I know that one of the reenactments in one of the shows shows it as a shotgun. Maybe that's where it comes from. It was definitely a .22 rifle. I had to actually pull down the court record and read the testimony, but it was a .22 rifle. So I don't know where it comes from, but it is a .22 rifle. And so, but it was well known that there were firearms present in the house. Robert had taken Corey shooting just previous to this. He was a gun owner and a shooter and stuff like that. So, it's certainly not that unusual. And so Corey called 911, reported the gun went off, claimed that he did CPR, was counting the compressions. When law enforcement first initially talked to Corey, he told them that he'd brought the rifle into the bedroom and he was holding it with his finger on the trigger and then, quote, it shot.
It shot.
And he described it as a completely accidental discharge while he was talking to his father. You know, the observations of the scene we talked about quite a little bit in the beginning, but, you know, Robert was laying on a twin bed. He had blood all around his head. The body appeared to be unmoved. He still had earplugs in his ears. The rifle was on the opposite side of the bed from the head wound. There was stippling around the wound like we talked about. The bedding was largely undisturbed, and there was no visible injuries on Corey whatsoever. No blood transfer that was observed on him whatsoever either. The EMTs at the scene would later testify that Corey talked about giving CPR, but they couldn't see where there had been any attempt to do so. And I already addressed that kind of at the beginning, that to me, that doesn't mean a shit ton if you're talking about a 10-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And another one of the EMTs said, well, not just the EMTs, the cops, the EMTs, several of them said that Corey said repeatedly things like, it feels like it's my fault. I think this is my fault, that kind of stuff. And all of them described Corey as being absolutely hysterical, crying, sobbing. And so because of the fact that the deputy, there's a deputy by the name of Vandemark, Deputy Vandemark got on the scene, and he initially talked to Corey, and he believed Corey. He believed everything that he was being told. And so there was never really any big forensic investigation into this. It was definitely determined to be a close range shot, but they never did any kind of reconstruction of the trajectory of the bullet. They didn't do any kind of GSR testing or anything like that. The coroner, he'd come in, he listened to the story, he looked at everything, and he ruled it an accident. So no charges were ever filed. CPS didn't get involved. The case just kind of quietly closed as a tragedy, and so at the end of the day, it was treated like, and it really appeared to be, nothing more than a tragic accident. That really would be the case for quite a long time. So Robert's funeral passed without any sort of a controversy. The life insurance was filed for, and it was processed as a routine life insurance payout. Judith would retain custody of Corey because, like we talked about, she's the adopted mom, so she's legally the mom now. So during those years, everything seemed to kind of go on the way that they had gone before Robert's death. Corey continued to go to school. He went to the same school, and then he progressed on through his school years in that same kind of area right there. They never moved away or anything. Nothing ever happened with the case. It was closed. It was considered an accident. And so the official story didn't change for a long freaking time. The system just moved on, and so did the family. Everybody just kind of moved on and just viewed this as a terribly tragic accident. And then sometime around, and this one's extremely difficult to nail down exact times on, but sometime around the 2000, I would say late 2011, early 2012 kind of a time period, Corey is now obviously considerably older, and he's a senior in high school. So he's right around that I think he was actually 18 at this point. And he's going to school, and his English teacher assigns an English project, which we all loved to do.
Oh, yeah.
English. And I actually really enjoyed English. I loved writing. And so
was my favorite.
I really did enjoy it. But she assigns this paper that was something along the lines of, describe an event in your life that had a tremendous impact on you. And so Corey went home and wrote this paper and turned it into his English teacher. And the English teacher read it, and it said, shooting my dad was no accident. And this is a tough one. I mean, it's sad as shit, but something to the effect of, shooting my dad was no accident, and I've lived with this for all of these years, and I have no idea if this is 1,500 words or not, but
wow,
I trust that you'll do the right thing with this, or That was obviously paraphrased. It wasn't verbatim, but it was very close to that. It was right along those lines.
So he wrote a confession hoping the teacher would do something about it.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
The teacher took it to the guidance counselor. The guidance counselor got involved and then said that it would be that it had been taken care of. And then so the guidance counselor said that it would be taken care of, and there wasn't a lot of follow-up after that, and it really becomes confusing as shit and very difficult to nail all of this down as far as time goes. But, and I can tell you that, I think there's probably a reason. Any of the covers that I saw on this on like other podcasts, and obviously I didn't listen to all the podcasts that have covered this, so if somebody did this, I'm not taking all the credit, but the podcast and then the like the oxygen specials and shit like that, they kind of combine two events all into one. And I know why they do it, because it's confusing as shit to figure out what happened where, and it's a much more easy story to tell, and it's much more cohesive if you just ignore that one ever happened altogether and just stem everything happening off of the English paper.
Okay.
But we're not going to do that, because that's not what happened. As near as I can figure, it was a very short time after that English paper was turned in that Corey was at a baseball game and another teacher was present. This was not his English teacher. This was a different teacher of his, and they ran into each other, and they were talking, and it wasn't made really clear exactly how the conversation came out or what exactly was said. But at this baseball game, Corey said to this teacher that shooting his dad was not an accident. And so this teacher then notified the authorities, and it was either, near as I can figure, he either turned in the English paper, the baseball game happened like right after the fact. Together, those went to the guidance counselor, who then went to the law enforcement and got them involved. Or the guidance counselor went to law enforcement, and then in the meantime, he met the teacher. I don't know the exact order of events, but the important...
Sounds like a mess.
Yeah. Well, it happened very quickly, and a lot of the stuff frames it almost like the English paper got turned in. The guidance counselor said that it would be taken care of. Nothing ever happened. And then months later, and even in a couple places that I read, it was like years later, like 2 years later, he went to the baseball game and saw this teacher, and then that's what triggered everything. Well, when you research it, that's bullshit. It couldn't have been that long, because both events definitely happened while he was a senior.
Right. Okay.
So the longest length of time that we could be talking about is a couple months. But then when you get to reading through the testimony at court, it makes it sound like it was right on top of each other. Almost like on Thursday, he turned in the English paper. On Friday or Saturday, he ran into the teacher at the baseball game. I can't nail down like an exact time, and I can't nail down an exact sequence of events. I feel very comfortable in saying that he turned the English paper in first. He met the other teacher at the baseball game second. The length of time between the two, I can't say for sure. My best guess, though, is we're talking maybe a couple days. We're not talking a long period of time. At this period of time, the police come in and they talk to Corey, and they begin interviewing him, and they reopen the case. They decide that they're going to reopen the case of the death of Robert Breininger. So as you know, at Dark Dialogue, we don't treat victims like they're footnotes. We don't tack a name onto the end of an episode and then call that the remembrance. We do our very best to honor them deliberately and respectfully, because a case is not just evidence and testimony. And as a matter of fact, that's the least important part of the case. It's about a person or people. And this story The person at the center of that loss is Robert Lee Breininger. Tonight's tribute is for a father whose life ended too soon, but it's also for the child who has carried that day into adulthood. For this first tribute in the arc, we're keeping the focus where it belongs, and that is on Robert. Now, the music that you're going to hear tonight is Beyond the Veil by the J.J. Hawk Band. And I chose this track for a very specific reason. This case begins in a world of working shifts and steel mill hours, rural roads, and a kind of quiet masculinity that doesn't perform emotion. It just carries it. This song has the same quality. It doesn't sensationalize grief. It doesn't dramatize pain. It sits in it, steady, grounded. And it makes space for remembrance without turning this into a spectacle. As this arc continues, the meaning of this song will deepen with the story, but tonight it serves a simpler purpose. To honor a father whose life mattered, to honor him as more than the worst day of his family's life, and to set a tone that matches who he was and the kind of life he lived. This is Beyond the Veil by the J.J. Hawk Band. And this is Robert Lee Breininger. Robert Lee Breininger was born January 11th, 1969 in Northwest Ohio. He grew up in Hicksville, the kind of place where people tend to stay rooted, where work is steady and where a name carries familiarity. There are no headlines attached to his early life, no public scandal, no dramatic arc. What survives in records and recollections is something simpler. A man raised in a household described as loving, structured, and steady. He stayed close to home. He built his adult life in the same region that raised him. He worked at Still Dynamics, shift work, long hours, nights that blurred into mornings. That kind of job does not bring attention. It brings stability. It brings groceries into the house. It keeps the lights on. It builds retirement accounts 1 week at a time. By his 20s, Robert was a father. His marriage ended when his son Corey was very young. And for a period of time, Robert became the primary parent. He worked. He leaned on his extended family when he needed to. He kept his son connected to grandparents and stability when the structure of marriage shifted. That isn't dramatic, but it is responsible. It's the kind of quiet fatherhood that doesn't get documentaries made about it. The kind that simply shows up. Robert didn't leave the region chasing reinvention. He built within what he knew. Northwest Ohio, steel mill shifts, rural roads, parent-teacher meetings, gun pamphlets and hunting plans, routine, responsibility, structure. By 2003, he was 34 years old enough to have lived some life, young enough to still be building it. He had a home, he had work, he had children under that roof. He had a son who watched him go to work at night and sleep during the day, who understood, even at 10, that providing for a family sometimes means exhaustion. There is something distinctly Midwestern about that life. It isn't loud, it isn't flashy. It is measured in hours worked and bills paid. And on November 3rd, 2003, that life ended inside his own bedroom. A shift worker who'd come home and gone to sleep. A father who never woke up. When a life ends at 34, when what is lost is not just the years lived, it's the years that were coming. More mornings, more arguments and reconciliations, more hunting seasons, more birthdays, more quiet conversations that no one else hears. Robert's story for many years was reduced to a single sentence: accidental shooting. But before that sentence, there was a man, a son, a worker, a father doing his best within the structure that he knew. And there is something else that remains. Corey is now a father himself. In interviews years later, he has said he would give anything for just one more day with his dad. That longing, that unfixable absence is part of this story too. Whatever unfolds in the episodes ahead, whatever complexities emerge, this began with a father whose life stopped at 34. Tonight, we remember Robert Lee Breininger, not as a case file, not as a headline, but as a man who worked hard, loved his son, and never woke up that afternoon.
I'll rise again.
If this episode moved you, if you value depth, structure, and honoring victims beyond the headlines, there are ways to be a part of what we're building here. The Dark Dialogue Collective is growing. These are boots-on-the-ground volunteers who help amplify victim stories, share resources, and support awareness in meaningful ways.
You can also visit www.darkdialogue.com to learn about our Adoptive Victim Program and to read the dedicated victim blog posts connected to each case that we cover. If you want to support the research that goes into this work, you can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/darkdialoguepod for recurring support, or to make a one-time contribution at ko-fi.com/darkdialogue.
And before I dive into this next part, I completely forgot to mention it, but the Dark Dialogue merch shop is now open.
Yes.
Go to our website, darkdialogue.com, and hit the shop button, and there's all kinds of cool shit on there. Well, hopefully it's cool. Maybe I'm tooting my own horn a little bit, but
You had a lot of fun that day.
it was a lot of fun. It was more than a day, but
Well,
it
yeah.
was, so we've got our Voices collection, which we put together, which is, I think it's kind of a cool logo. It's a cool design. I think it works really well. I did a women's collection and a men's collection, and so it doesn't mean that one can't wear the other or none of that kind of stuff, but there is definitely a more
We don't decide.
there's definitely a more feminine logo, and then the one that we're calling, I don't know, maybe more masculine is really a unisex, like whatever. I mean, it would look good on a woman or a man, honestly, I think. But we've got hoodies, we've got coffee cups, we've got tumblers, we've got all kinds of clothing items and stuff like that. But the cool thing about both, I did it with both the Rocky Mountain Reckoning collection and the Voices collection. Both of those, a percentage of all the profits go towards victim support, and so percentages and that kind of stuff is all spelled out in there. But it's really freaking cool, and there's some really neat, I think, merchandise on there.
I think so.
We've got everything from pillows and blankets to t-shirts and don't be an ass hat hoodies and
Yes.
all kinds of fun stuff for you to check out. So that's www.darkdialogue.com, and hit the shop button and it'll take you right there. So other than that, for expanded research materials, timelines, and written deep dives connected to this arc, subscribe to our Substack at darkdialoguecrime.substack.com. If you have information relevant to any case that we cover, or you simply want to reach out, tell us we're idiots, or tell us we're doing a great job, whatever you want to tell us, you can email us directly at info@darkdialogue.com.
And if you're listening on a podcast platform or watching on YouTube, please take a moment to like, share, subscribe, leave a review, give a thumbs up, and ring the notification bell. These small actions tell the algorithm that this content matters, and they help these stories reach more people. Dark Dialogue is part of a growing network of shows, ever growing because John doesn't stop,
Ever growing.
including Rocky Mountain Reckoning, Dark Dialogue Distilled, Dark Dialogue Unraveled Truths, Dark Dialogue Gallows and Gunfights, and Dark Dialogue Shadow Chat Sessions. All are available on every major podcast platform.
We'll continue to grow this arc in the next episode. where we begin examining what happened after the story shifted. Until then, keep listening, keep talking, stay vigilant, and keep the dialogue alive.